Welcome into another edition of Mavs Latest. I'm Josyah Howard, and before we get it started here today, please subscribe down below. Every subscriber helps. Leave any comments you got for me as we're going along here today. It's Mavs Latest, Dallas Mavericks every day with me, Josyah Howard, here on Mavs Latest. But let's start here because the Mavericks, they heard that they have a couple big scheduling matchups here in the provisional schedule. A couple leaks in the schedule dropped, and one is that Christmas Day 2025 on ESPN and ABC, according to senior insider for ESPN Shams Charania, will include the Dallas Mavericks facing the Golden State Warriors if everything holds up the way it's supposed to hold up. Another matchup that was brought up was the inevitable matchup between the Mavericks and Cooper Flagg against Luka Doncic, and the league has announced group play in the NBA Cup for the 25-26 season, running from the 31st of October to November 28th, meaning the Mavericks and Lakers would fall on the day after Thanksgiving if the provisional schedule becomes official later this month. Another one is the opening night game for Dallas as well. If that provisional schedule holds up, Dallas will play San Antonio at home in the opening night game, October 22nd, pitting Cooper Flagg against Dylan Harper, the number one and number two picks. This is league sources telling Mark Stein and DLLS Sports. So, couple fun matchups to start the season, obviously, with Dylan Harper and the Spurs and Wembanyama to open the season. And on Christmas Day, Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler, Draymond Green, Dallas heads to Golden State for their matchup on Christmas Day. But to move on from that one, on Kevin O'Connor's podcast for Yahoo Sports, he brought up that the Luka trade may have cost them Quentin Grimes. And he said he heard last year Quentin Grimes didn't want to be in Dallas after Max Christie got there and thought that was there was actually kind of a mini trade request that kind of went under the radar. And that is one of the reasons why he ended up getting sent to Philly in a package. And in his last 28 games after the season, he averaged 21 points per game, 5 rebounds, 4 assists, and he had a 46 point outburst against the Rockets, a 44 point game against the Warriors. And before anyone says anything, and yes, Quentin Grimes is still out there as a free agent. No, the Mavericks couldn't realistically bring him in. Um, he would have a qualifying offer that would only be worth a little over $8 million. Um, so it seems like a lot of these restricted free agents are having a really tough time in this market, getting a deal, including Quentin Grimes, excuse me, and you would think after his outburst in Philly, and Philly doesn't necessarily need him anymore because their guards will be healthy, and a lot of that opportunity is now lost for him. But you thought he was playing for a job this coming off season, and I thought he kind of earned one. And Dallas can't really fit him in their books, obviously, but you would have thought another team would have came in and swooped Quentin Grimes after the performances he put on last year, and really, and at times, put Philly on his back, especially when Jared McCain went out as well, and they shut down pretty much everyone in Philly. So Quentin Grimes asking for a trade after Max Christie specifically joining the locker room, and he felt like his opportunity wouldn't have been there. Went to Philly and got that perfect opportunity. I don't think he goes for 21, almost 22 points per game in his final 28 games of the regular season without being traded. That doesn't happen in Dallas. So for any fan that's like, oh, you traded Quentin Grimes, look what he's doing now in Philly. He just wouldn't have had that opportunity in Dallas, even with all those injuries that ended up piling up at the end of last year. I don't see how the offense would have been able to be built around him enough to put out this scoring output of almost 22 points per game in 28 games, almost 30 games. That's a real sample size. That's not a illegitimate sample size. So I think, and there, again, you got Jonathan Kuminga still looking for a deal, Josh Giddey, Cam Thomas. The restricted free agency market is as weird as I've ever seen it. I would not want I wouldn't wish any I wouldn't wish that on any of these pretty talented players, but they're just all not stars, and they're all players that everyone thought they'd have this potential, and it hasn't quite reached its full max bar that anyone thought it could. But they still have room to grow in a Josh Giddey or a Cam Thomas and a Jonathan Kuminga. I do view Quentin Grimes out of those three at the bottom of the list in terms of people I'd be hyper focused in getting back on the restricted free agency market. So interesting to see Quentin Grimes putting in a little mini trade request the moment Luca got kicked out the door, brought in Max Christie, all according to Yahoo Sports Kevin O'Connor. But moving on next, Bleacher Report. They had power rankings after all the team's offseason moves, and the Dallas Mavericks land at 15, and their rationale: there are very real questions about the return date for Kyrie Irving and the general durability of Anthony Davis, but Cooper Flagg looking ready to contribute right away at the Las Vegas Summer League could be all part of the answer. Even before Kyrie is back in the lineup, the Dallas Mavericks figure to be one of the league's tougher, longer, and more rugged defensive units. AD, Flagg, Derek Lively II, and Daniel Gafford in the front court will present a daunting challenge for opposing bigs. Even sliding Davis to the 5 and having the more switchable PJ Washington on the floor in place of the bigger centers will work against plenty of opponents and lineups. Offense will certainly be trickier to come by, but even in the loaded West, their defensive talent is enough for this team to be competitive. Um, I don't think there's anything else I could add to that. I agree with all of that. I view the Dallas Mavericks as presently constructed a middle of the pack team. And for all the reasons that Bleacher Report listed. And, the offense is something I'm a little worried about. And when the ball, when the ball is not dropping, when you can't see the rim, when the rim looks a little bit smaller than it usually looks, who are you going to give the ball to get your team to the finish line? And Kyrie Irving to me is one of those players that does that. I don't know if Anthony Davis does that. You can't ask a Cooper Flagg to be able to do that right away. You can't ask him to do that right now. So honestly, I agree 1,000% with 15 right smack dab in the middle of the league. I think they could disappoint, and I think they could surprise some people. So again, the timing of Kyrie Irving coming back really is super dependent in all this. Um, and really, if they can make up the offense to go with the great defense that I do think the Mavericks will have this year. But to wrap it up with some Mavs chatter, Lorenzo Almenza of Smoking Cuban, he brought up the ESPN survey that I mentioned a few shows ago. A poll kind of just predicting how many teams Flagg will pay for, how many MVPs, championships, All-Star appearances, etc. And Lorenzo of the Smoking Cuban kind of brings up the point of how many people think that the Mavericks will have a similar situation to the Luka situation, where Cooper Flagg is not necessarily a long-term stop in Dallas. And a lot of players, a lot of people, they had Cooper Flagg would play for two or more teams at 53.8% of the voters, had two teams, and 34.6% of the voters had three separate teams he played for. And only 3% of the voters thought he would only play for the Mavericks. So Yeah, a lot of people at ESPN are already really predicting that Dallas is not going to be it for Cooper, and he's going to, at one point or another, go to another stop or even another stop after that. And in the Smoking Cuban article, they do mention that actually it might not necessarily be the worst thing for Cooper Flagg in the world to play for another team in the end. And he says, keeping Flagg might be in the team's best interest, obviously. After trading Luka Doncic is bad taste. So, you know, I don't think it. I said this in the pod talking about this poll in general. If I had to bet on it, he is not a Maverick for life, and that's not necessarily because of the Luka trade and how Nico Harrison handled all of that. More of that has to do with how the league is operated today. Players don't really play for one team their entire career anymore. They just don't. It's just not what happens in the league anymore. Steph Curry might be the last player to end up doing that in the league. Um, Giannis still might have a chance, but I don't know. So many rumors out there. Joker might have a chance to do that. We thought Luca might do that, but then he got traded. So again, if you had to bet that if Cooper Flagg was either with the Mavericks his whole career or two other teams his whole career, probably safer the bet that he'll be on the Mavericks and two other teams in his career. Just based upon how the NBA operates nowadays. Not because, you know, of how you feel about front office, not how you feel about how the Mavericks operate. Because that's just how NBA players operate, man. If they want to go to a better opportunity, quote unquote, better opportunity, they're going to do that and they have that flexibility. So yeah, we at least need to pump the brakes on he's already gonna like leave and go to different places. Like let him be a Maverick first. Let him have a front half of his career, front third of his career first. But yeah, if I had to bet, he's probably not a Maverick his whole career. But this has been another Mavs latest. Again, please subscribe down below. Leave any comments you got for me down below, and let's get it, y'all.